The Bitcoin Group, the American original. For over the last 10 seconds, the sharpest Satoshis, the best Bitcoins, the hardest cryptocurrency talk. We'd like to welcome our panelists, Blake Anderson from Facebook.com/GotBlake.
What's up, everybody?
Brian Sovereign from Sovereign Tech.
Hey, everybody.
Megan Lords from Bitcoin Not Bombs.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And I'm Thomas Hunt from the World Crypto Network. Issue 1, the Pirate Bay is still down. The Pirate Bay has not been resurrected yet. The Pirate Bay is still offline in what seemed like a temporary outage and may become a permanent one. Early reports of the site being back up in Costa Rica or .ee addresses have proven false. The founders are tired of running the site, and the MPAA is going to block any successors from the United States, cutting off piracy at its root. Is internet piracy over? Has the MPAA won? Blake Anderson.
Well, it's funny. If it has one, then there's going to be a technology that's going to spring up and it's going to subvert this block. I mean, if the MPAA is going to try to ban various different traffic, people can go into using Tor or encrypted tunnels, and then they can go and subvert with various different proxies. So the people that are distributing the things will still be able to get it. And even if it totally shuts down on the internet, they can physically distribute in various different areas, and so it's still going to get out. This is not a problem that they can just fix with a heavy hand. This is a problem that stems all the way back to the core beliefs of intellectual property undermining real property rights, and it's not something that's going to be easily handled. So I don't think it matters what they spend money on, what they do, what kind of genius they hire. They can resurrect Newton and give him this problem. He's not going to be able to help out. So that's my take on it.
And Newton would be a zombie. Brian Sovereign.
I think that, with the Pirate Bay, obviously it's come and gone a few times now. There was really famous the first time, I think it was in 2007 maybe, when they ended up like 24 hours later being back up in Egypt. I don't see any take the charge. Popular sites like Demonoid have, they've been taken down in the past, and they just recently came back, even with a lot of their torrents from, because they got shut down in like 2011. A lot of those torrents are still operating. I could see them coming back, but at the same time, I think what's really going to be happening is companies like Netflix that have been looking into peer-to-peer are really going to make their services so redundant, so easy to use, and so user-friendly. I guess it's the same as easier to use, but they'll be doing that, and when that happens, it'll be much like Spotify, where downloading music, while still popular, it doesn't reach the numbers that it did even 2 years ago. So I think the market's going to end up making it a lot simpler, and that really there may not be a point to the Pirate Bay, even existing anymore for the purposes of music or of movies in this case.
Spotify for movies. That sounds like a great service. Megan Lords.
Yeah, I think Brian made a really good point, and this is, I think, a good example of when laws try to stifle technology, and it ends up ultimately being ineffective because the tools that the government uses to try to stop technology are so far behind it that we're going to see these innovations keep happening, in a lot of different directions. And I don't think information can really be stopped, especially with something like the internet. I don't think you can stop technology with laws and, writing on paper anymore. They're going to have to be a lot more proactive, and if they want to fight technology, they're going to have to do it with technology and not laws and regulations and things like that.
And we still might need a site like the Pirate Bay to store movies that they won't have on Netflix or Spotify. Exit question. When will the Pirate Bay come back? 2 weeks? 3 months? 1 year? Or never? Blake Anderson.
Oh, it'll be hard to guess because, who's going to take the risk? There's the risk element of it, and then there's also the data element. And the risk is really high, and the data overhead is really, really low. I mean, to host torrent links or shortcuts to torrent files that are hosted in a decentralized fashion is not that much data, so it could pop up really quickly, or there could be people that are like, we don't want the risk, and if everyone else is getting shut down or thrown into a rape cage, then they're probably not going to be too excited to host it. So it could be a little while, or it could be longer, and it could completely transcend the name or become a different type of technology. So I think it's kind of up in the air right now.
Maybe the real problem is the founders didn't just call themselves Dread Pirate Robert so we could just number the next guy. Brian Sovereign.
I think there's probably a pretty good chance that and a lot of people, in fact, years ago, were already wanting to get people away from BitTorrent and more back toward groups. And there was a lot of educational classes that were actually funded by people in the Pirate Baron, which is like this, I don't know if I pronounced that right, which was a political party that the Pirate Bay was kind of behind in Sweden. And I would venture that that's really what's going to happen. Someone's going to come up just with a new technology, and so the Pirate Bay may not need to come back at all.
Newsgroups is a good idea, well worth mentioning. You could download a lot of stuff on there. It was a great discussion group. Just kind of got taken over by the internet, not sure why. Megan Lords.
Yeah, it's hard to put a timeline on these things. You know, it could be replaced with a new technology. If the owners are finding it to be too much of a risk and not enough incentive to start it back up again, then we might not ever see it again. So, but I think there are going to be, you know, ways around this. And like I said earlier, you can't stop the flow of information now.
And I like what Thomas said about newsgroups, because newsgroups is almost the iteration before the P2P file sharing phenomena started. And if we had newsgroups and they were too centralized and it was, you know, copyright infringement that was easy to take out and ban, then we had, you know, the peer-to-peer, and if they can, you know, choke out the torrent hosting site, then that might spark an iteration of another technology, which, you know, might be something that we can imagine what it looks like. It might not. It might be pretty alien. So that's, you know, something cool that could be exciting.
Maybe we could have a distributed newsgroup server. Maybe we could even use a blockchain. Moving on, issue 2. Former vice president accused of war crimes. Dick Richard Cheney spoke out on the CIA torture war crimes, asking, "How nice do you want to be to murderers? As nice as having a war crimes trial and holding them accountable for their crimes? How nice is that? The CIA tortured, covered it up, lying to both Congress and the American people about both the existence and the effectiveness of their human torture program. Should the CIA be punished for their crimes? More importantly, will they?" Brian Sovereign. Looks like we're having internet problems since we mentioned the CIA. Megan Lords, are you still with us?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead. We'll see if we can get Brian back.
I've not been contacted by the government. So, okay, will they? Probably not. I tend to be a bit of a pessimist when it comes to this kind of thing. You know, and this whole talk of a trial, putting them on trial, kind of is confusing to me, because you would think that we're a country, you know, built on due process and stuff, but we couldn't even extend this right to innocent people who ended up being tortured and killed. And this is something that's been going on for a very long time. Actually, in the book Dirty Wars, Jeremy Scahill covers this quite a bit, which is where I found out about a lot of the torture techniques the CIA was using. And when this information came out, it was obviously gruesome and horrifying. It was something that I had already seen, and I think if a lot of people really understood Scale's work, they would have already known. It may not have been as much of a shock, but I think people do need to be shocked by this. This isn't something people should be desensitized to. This is something that's horrific and awful, and unfortunately, I don't think the people who knew what was going on, who perpetuated these crimes, are even worthy of a trial, to be honest. I don't know what kind of solutions people that are going to come of this. I expect them to get away with it, though, because that's kind of been the trend for, I mean, since the beginning of this country. If you really think about it, government has been completely crushing, you know, every type of innovation, and then taking out on their enemies something that they claim to not be doing. You know, they claim to have this kind of decency, this kind of, it kind of plays into this idea of American exceptionalism, but it's a bunch of bullshit ultimately. These are horrible, wicked, monstrous people, and I mean, they're barely better than animals, to be honest. And I've been seeing a lot of arguments from the right on this. I grew up in a right-wing town, and I've been seeing a lot of arguments from the right about, like, oh, well, you know, you don't, murderers don't deserve, you know, any kind of decency, and 9/11 and 9/11 this and 9/11 that. I'm really sick of hearing about it because it's ultimately meaningless. These were innocent people in a lot of cases that were starved, beaten to death, rectally fed. I mean, does anyone deserve that, really? Like, honestly, does anyone deserve to be rectally infused with food? Like, that's the most insane, barbarous thing I've ever heard of. And for people to, I've also been seeing a lot of like kind of blaming it on Bush, which I think is a fascist and who I just absolutely hate. But this is something the Obama administration was briefed on at the very beginning of his presidency. So a lot of the burden falls on the current administration and the people who supported him being elected. So I would ask everyone to consider the graphic nature of these crimes and see them for what they are, which is war crimes, complete crimes against humanity. And I don't have a whole lot of hope that the people who perpetuated it will ever be brought to justice.
It was the Obama administration who, mere months after they came into office, said that they were not going to look backwards, and they were not going to attempt to even find out what happened or punish the people that committed these war crimes. And as you know, with war crimes, they are now guilty of a war crime themselves. Brian Sovereign, are you back with us? We mentioned the CIA and you disappeared.
Oh, I'm here. Yeah, it's used to work with those guys. So, no. As far as torture, you know, and the idea of Dick Cheney saying essentially, how would you want to treat a murderer? Well, I think the question, would you want to be treated if you were wrongfully accused, wrongfully incarcerated? And that opens up everything. You know, it's really a mistake to just think of it that simply. I mean, there are, you know, and so many people fall into this you know, way of thinking that, well, war is hell. But again, if you got caught in the middle of it, how would you want it to be? And nobody ever cares to think about that aspect of it. And suddenly everything would kind of change, and then they want to say to themselves, well, I'd never be a part of that. And that's the thing, is that I'm sure the people, you know, in the Middle East,
The CIA is doing some serious QoS scheduling on Brian here.
I blame the snow. But Blake, do you want to go ahead?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that it's unfortunately really typical and obvious when you have, you know, a collective that's going to justify its existence, saying, you know, well, these negative means that we're going to go about are going to be justified by positive ends. I mean, that's insane to say that you're going to go torture people and then there's going to be some magical step and in the end there's going to be net benefit. That's terrible. No, you're enabling and going and torturing people. And this is what you need to understand, that Machiavellianism is not good, that Rome taught us this lesson a long time ago. And you cannot torture people. There is never going to be an argument that says, yeah, let's go all out and torture a whole bunch of people to find out, you know, what's going on. It's not something that, you know, our country should even be talking about or kicking around. We should have this figured out. So it's really disgusting that it happened and that people aren't more outraged. And will they be taken to task and held accountable? You know, unfortunately, probably not, unless there's a big social change that happens. So
that's a good point, Blank, that Machiavelli was not supposed to be a how-to or a learning manual. Much like George Orwell's 1984, it's supposed to be a warning and even perhaps a satire. And if anyone would just spend the time to read any book about the prison experience, I think they would think hard and differently about what it's like to send someone to jail, especially, like Brian pointed out, wrongly accused. If you look at a work like The Count of Monte Cristo, thousands of days in jail, how it wore on him, or Alexander Solzhenitsyn's A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, you can really understand, like, Siberia, the cold, trudging through it. And that's where these war criminals need to be, is in jail or on death row. Exit question. After World War II, in Nuremberg, Germany, the United States and other allies held the leaders of Nazi Germany accountable for war crimes using this judicial instrument. Blake Anderson.
Was it the Nuremberg trials?
It was a trial. That's correct. A war trial. A war crimes trial. That's what you do. When someone commits a war crime, you have a trial, something called truth and consequences. You get all of the facts and you lay them where they may. And if our leaders have to go to jail, then our leaders have to go to jail. Let's see. We're joined by Brian. Do you want to give it one more shot on the CIA torture before we move to the next issue? Oh, yeah, you had some good points. We'll move on to issue 3. Issue 3, we'll be back. Hong Kong protesters chant as their campsite was dismantled. Hong Kong police cleared out the last section of pro-democracy protesters, clearing the streets based upon an injunction received by a bus company. The Hong Kong people were polite to the last, sweeping up debris, with many leaving the scene and some staying behind to be peacefully arrested in one final show of disobedience. Professors, politicians, and other dignitaries were on hand to ensure the police did not become violent. Is the umbrella revolution for democracy in Hong Kong over? Or has it just begun? Brian Sovereign, back with us.
Yeah, I think as far as any movement, in my opinion, any movement that actually is trying to affect real change, if it's out in the open, it's never going to make it. There's too many forces, be it whatever mainstream media, be it government forces, be it military, police, whatever. I don't really see it ever happening. It's subvertising or subversive kind of and non-violent at that. I would never promote violence by any stretch, and nor did many of them in Hong Kong, it seems. It really seems to be the only way that you ever get any actual genuine change, because when you look at Arab Spring, there really wasn't a whole lot of change after the fact. Initially, it looked like there would be, but again, it all has to happen really slow build, and from grassroots, I guess would be the word that they would say, and it can't be known about. Honestly, otherwise it doesn't stick, or it never gets far enough.
I think it's important to lay down communications lines for a longer-term movement, not just to protest and go away, but to protest, go away, and come back again is what's important. Megan Lords.
Yeah, I first want to say I really appreciate the coverage that World Crypto Network has done on the Hong Kong protests. I don't really see a lot of other media sources covering that, and that's really important. But at the same time, I can't really give an opinion on this because I'm not informed enough to the geopolitical landscape of Hong Kong. I don't have enough of an understanding of the politics involved, and I think Brian made some really good points. When you have an out movement that's very, out front of things, that it tends to be crushed really swiftly. I do hope that there is some kind of solidarity among the protesters, that they can organize and create something beautiful out of this, but I'm obviously just not informed enough to say whether or not this is the next rising of democracy.
And this was a very key point in Hong Kong's history. Having been handed back over to China from Britain, this was their point to say, we want to elect our governors. Previously they did. After the protest, we'll see if they do. Blake Anderson.
Well, yeah, it's a tricky question, because it's like the whole question of when an unstoppable force hits an immovable object, what happens? And I agree with Brian that they're going to do everything they can to smear the protesters, to turn people's perceptions against one another, to engage in class war, to try to quash the movement. But at the same time, things are getting so tight with the entire fiat world global debt crisis, and the countries are becoming so insolvent that there's going to be more and more and more of a rising tide of unhappiness all across the political spectrum. So I don't think that it's going to stop, even if only because the people of China were chanting as they took their stuff down that we'll be back. And I think that when you put yourself in that position to be shouting that at people, it gets into your subconscious, and you're going to definitely go do that. So will there be enough of an impact coming back to really parlay this into something effective? I don't know, but I don't think that we've heard the end of it just yet.
That's just what they used to say all the time, Blake, that a rising tide of unhappiness lifts all boats. Exit question. Occupy Wall Street, the Arab Spring, Occupy Hong Kong, Ferguson, Eric Garner. Are there more protests in the world, or are we just hearing about them more often? Is there a real-life global democracy movement happening right in front of our eyes? Brian Sovereign.
I think a good example is China itself, where you have the paramount leader of the PRC, Deng Xiaoping. He pretty much said that, okay, we're going to have one country, but two systems. And that means that they would accept a degree of capitalism with Macau and Hong Kong. And with that in mind, I think that's the thing, is that when these kind of rise-ups occur, the big boys, the bigger governments, the they, them, those will play ball with them to some degree, to kind of placate them. And so whether or not we're hearing more about them, maybe we are hearing more about it, but regardless, I don't think it's ever going to bring any actual change if it's something that we do even hear about.
Megan Lords.
So democracy means very different things depending on where you are in the world, and I think what we are seeing is maybe not more protests, but there's just more of a focus on it. We have such access to media now that you kind of see it happening a lot more. At least the coverage of it happening a lot more, but there is a problem of unity as far as a unifying philosophical principle that these protests have, and there is no kind of unity. They all have radically different goals, you know, whether it's the Ferguson protests or Occupy Wall Street. You know, there's not any kind of real unifying force other than we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore, which is good, which is a good motivating force, but if you don't have any kind of plan behind that, then things just get broken and not repaired. And that's the problem, is how do you repair these broken systems after you've completely destroyed them? And I think what you saw with the Ferguson protests has been a long time coming in a lot of places. I think you're seeing the rise of police brutality, or at least the rise in awareness of police brutality. I think the police have always been brutal, but now you see more of an awareness of it, and I think that's really important for there to be some kind of social and cultural change. But it has to start in the mind, and it can't be forced, you know, by other people. I'm not a huge fan of democracy, honestly. A lot of the people in Ferguson were asking for more government, and same with Occupy Wall Street. They completely missed the point that the government was in collusion with the banks to steal homes from people and to completely crush lower classes of people. So a lot of people get the prescription wrong when they enter into these large protests. I think protests can be very valuable and useful for getting a message out, but if again, there's not that unity there, and there needs to be a stronger sense of unity and philosophical, I think, diligence with people, to where, you know, the solution isn't more government. These are the people who torture other human beings. There's no redemption in that. There's no redeeming quality. You can't go to these same people who are torturing people on one hand and then expect them to protect you on the other hand. So, you know, I think of course, you know, a lot of us describe ourselves as anarchists, and my anarchism is a kind of personal anarchism that kind of starts with a self-control, and I think we're going to need to see more of that, just an internal kind of self-control, and you know, even just a more focus on history, just being more informed and aware of the history of different uprisings and movements, because right now we're seeing a lot of anger and a lot of rage and a lot of these sporadic protests, but I don't know that they're ultimately going to go anywhere without a little more diligence and focus on the kind of end goals.
It's a good point, Megan, that the government has put no one in jail for the home mortgage crisis, no one in jail for the LIBOR scandal, no one in jail for a variety of other financial scandals.
And they all just got more bonuses, too. I mean,
it's Christmas time. They need those bonuses. Come on, you've seen the Lexus wrapped up with a bow. That bow doesn't come cheap.
That's true.
Blake Anderson.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's so much social unhappiness as there continues to be more inflation and printing money. It reduces the value of the dollar. People with the least to lose really have hardship. So actually, Occupy Wall Street, in my understanding of history, came about as a result of Anonymous calling for occupation of public protests until Ben Bernanke stepped down. And then the internet and Wikipedia and stuff, like all overnight, all of a sudden, when it started to garner attention, we're like, no, a Canadian company called like Adbusters or AdWorks and stuff, and Dick Army and all this stuff, and they started filming everybody talking about communism, and it was kind of like, no, like this was done on purpose. Like if you Google Control-Alt Bernanke Occupy or whatever, and you look at the date that it was posted, and then look at the date that Occupy started and all that, that makes a lot more sense than some, you know, Canadian company being like, advertising and corporations are bad, let's go Occupy Wall Street. So I mean, like when I was saying about what Brian said before, as far as they're really good at quashing this kind of stuff and it can't be out in the open. You know, I've seen evidence of that with the huge turnaround that they were able to pull on Occupy. So it's tough to imagine all of the horrifying tricks that the government has in its filthy little knapsack that it's going to be able to pull out on all this stuff, because you know, some people even argue that the government collapsed Gox by you know, Willy bot trading and then, you know, arbitrage cycling a honeypot into it until it was insolvent. So the government is one tricky, devious thing, and keep that in mind when you're going to these protests and stuff, because there are lots of things going on that is, the government has been engaged into alter perception, and it sounds crazy, it sounds insane, but we're seeing proof of it at every single one of these events. So I mean, watch yourself.
Well, remember, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was making the world believe he didn't exist. Moving on, issue 4. Reddit has secret Bitcoin plans, and they don't include ChangeTip. Reddit's newly hired cryptocurrency engineer Ryan X. Charles recently answered questions about his new position, saying that integrating digital currency tipping into its core UI was high on the list of options, and that despite a recent surge in popularity, Reddit might not seek to integrate with existing tipping platforms, saying that security is absolutely paramount with this stuff. Integrating tipping into the Reddit UI while simultaneously guaranteeing security is non-trivial. Blake Anderson, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it is non-trivial. We're getting to the point in the security as far as security considerations go for companies in the Bitcoin space, like amateur hour is way over. And when he's talking about, we're going to implement things into our, stack, you got to make sure that the people that you're working with have their stuff, brick shithouse-esque. You have to make sure that you're in line with, ITIL, PCDIS, and all kinds of other stuff like that. So, if ChangeTip and Reddit worked together, that would be really cool. But as far as the amount of equity and capital and presence that Reddit has, that'd be a really, really risky maneuver without vetting ChangeTip really, really, really closely. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out from a risk management and mitigation standard, because adding new features to Reddit would be so expensive if they weren't inherently secure, which is going to be an expensive process. So it's going to be really, really interesting to see how security plays out in the new Bitcoin space, because it is so expensive to get really good security, and so few people are willing to pay for it, and so few people have. It'll be interesting to see what the fallout from that becomes.
And remember, to put it into context, this is the same week where blockchain.info was delisted from bitcoin.org. Then a few days later, they had a security update that turned out to be a security failure where hundreds of addresses were exposed, then swept by, fortunately, a white hat hacker who returned the money. But next time blockchain.info or whoever else doesn't have two-factor authentication, hasn't kept up with the latest security practices, will fall victim to hackers. Brian Sovereign.
Yeah, I know Ryan Charles. He's actually a pretty brilliant guy, pretty brilliant programmer. He actually devised a web-based multi-sig wallet for BitPay, which I guess he previously worked for, or however that's all happening. So he's a guy that can talk about the fact that, hey, no, we need more secure systems. And he's a guy that I know that would look at older versions of code, which a lot of things are getting based upon, whatever open source licenses, whatever they may be, and would know to not just use those, but to actually learn from the mistakes of those. So security is absolutely paramount, no doubt about it, and I think he is a guy that really knows what he's talking about when he says that, and I think new implementations need to, because everything's broken, I think, as far as like coding languages go. I mean, even the most secure stuff that a lot of people talk about, like Pigeon or something, I mean, that's all written in C, and C is a terrible language to write things in. So yeah, take the time. The time is worth taking, and definitely come up with something new. And I don't know of an implementation out there that I would even want to integrate with. So good for them. Good for him. I agree. It needs to be something new and something, something that's done its due diligence.
It's also the strangest thing. Before you're hacked, you can try anything you want, but after you're hacked, you could never change that.
Yeah, right.
And there's no second chances in IT security. I mean, you got to tattoo that on your face if you're going to get into the business.
Yeah. Megan Lords, go ahead.
Yeah, we learned a lot of lessons in 2014 in the Bitcoin space, and the biggest ones were specifically about security and people not taking it seriously enough. And I think he's being very cautious with this decision, and that's what I'd really like to see more of in 2015. I think a lot of us have become a little sobered by all of the things that have happened this year. It's gone by extremely fast, and a lot of the problems were caused by not doing the due diligence, being overly optimistic optimistic and not cautious enough. So I'd like to see more caution. And I definitely agree with his remarks as far as Reddit goes, and especially what Brian said too. We need to have these standards, and they're constantly changing standards too. So it's something that there needs to be a little more focus on, and maybe let's kind of roll back the enthusiasm, take our time, to do things correctly, because there were so many, huge mistakes made this year, millions of Bitcoin lost by people, and it didn't have to be that way. So hopefully, we'll see just more caution in 2015.
All right, bonus question. What's one security or technology tip that you would give people for the new year? I'll go ahead and start off. Always use two-factor authentication. Get it on your Gmail, get it on your Bitcoin wallet, and it's on your phone, and it's secure. Do that. And then my new thing for next year, I'm not sure what software I'm going to use to do this, but always use a new Bitcoin address. Some kind of program or software where it always prompts you and it always gives you one. And I don't know if it's going to need dark wallet or some kind of coin mixing to really do it, but there's got to be a way where when I send Bitcoin, you can't tell everything that I've bought. And if there isn't a way, we're going to have to work on a way. Blake, do you have a security tip for the new year?
Security tip for the new year. Yeah, I mean, it's just know what you're doing. If you're going to have things in a multi-sig wallet, that's good. That's still a hot wallet, cold storage, hot storage. Know the difference. I kind of like to say if you have a whole horse ton of gold that you put your wealth into, you're going to spend some money making sure that that gold is secure. You wouldn't spend no portion of your fortune to secure it. So like IT security is the same thing. If you have a valuable company, spend some money to make sure that your company doesn't fall apart. If you have a horse ton of Bitcoin somewhere, hire a security consultant that you trust and that you can audit and stuff like that to make sure that what you're doing is what you should be doing to make sure that that wealth is stable. I mean, risk management and mitigation is valuable. We need to handle it in more of a decentralized way than we used to, because it used to just be the bank that would do that and they would be bailed out by the Fed, but that's not the case anymore, and people need to get on board with the personal responsibility of shell out a little bit to make sure that what you're saving is secure, because in the future the myriad of systemic vulnerabilities of the Fortune 25 financial banks, they're not going to be secure. So learn now and be ready later.
And remember, while it's still a black box and we don't really know what happened on the inside, at least from the outside, the failure of Mt. Gox and Mark Karpelès seems to be that he held all power himself, never hired someone smarter than him, and never spread out the responsibilities. If your situation changed, as we've talked about several times, if your investment goes from $1,000 to $10,000 or $10,000 to $100,000, you need to change your security. If your company changes as well, you need to change your strategies. You need to expand with the times, or you won't expand. Brian Sovereign, a tech tip for the new year?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, Thomas, actually your point of really decentralizing and breaking down scale is really important. But my tech tip is really, kind of for individuals more so than companies, is get away from Gmail. Almost all of these cracks and thefts and everything that we hear about usually comes from, even with two-factor authentication, it's somewhere in the equation, comes from somebody having a Gmail address. Now, whether that's because people years ago, when it first started, came out in beta, were using their real names, their full names, and so it's easy to guess what a person's Gmail address is, or what, or just because Google is such a honeypot of data. Considering how centralized, you're talking about decentralization, how centralized Google's services are. To get your Gmail, which is the core, or to get your email address, which is the core identity of all these services, away from Google is a huge step for security. Really, we've heard cases after case in the Bitcoin world of where a Gmail address was the problem, and I think that's a good tech tip. Get away from Gmail.
That's a good point. Often when an email account is taken over, they reset the rest of your accounts back to that email account. So, of course, and a lot of us have become reliant on Gmail. It's just easy, ubiquitous, easy to use, but there are other options, and maybe Proton Mail coming out this year, Brian, something like that?
Yeah, Proton Mail, Start Mail just came out. There's quite a few. There's whiteout.io. Lots of great, really secure implementations you could run to.
Very cool. Megan Lords, a tech tip for the new year?
Yeah, so security is something I'm constantly learning more about, and something I kind of had to learn the hard way about too. And I think everyone's given really good tips, and what I would just say is, all of those tips are great, but when you're setting someone up with Bitcoin, be sure to take the extra time to make sure that they're secure. I know a lot of people like to give small amounts of Bitcoin away to people. They're like, oh, just download this app on your phone, and here, I'll send you some Bitcoin. But that's not going to be useful to the person who isn't secure, if their email isn't secure, if their wallet's not secure. Take the extra time to make sure that they understand the technology a little bit better, and especially how to secure their coins and even their email too, especially with two-factor. It's not a hard process to do, and if a lot of people are still going to use Gmail anyway. I'm looking into alternatives. I'm glad you guys mentioned those. But a lot of people are still going to use Gmail, so you can make it secure, to a degree without a whole lot of effort. And I think that's something that really needs to be taken into account when people are giving Bitcoin away to people. I think it's great that we can expand Bitcoin by giving away free Bitcoin. That's awesome, but ultimately it doesn't do anyone any good if it's just going to get stolen from someone.
And while it is a complicated process, try to use a wallet like Airbits or blockchain.info where you can link the wallet to an email account, then the person could get a backup of the wallet. This way, if they upgrade their phone, they won't lose their Bitcoins. Andreas Antonopoulos was just on the Joe Rogan show again, and he gave one of the guys their Bitcoin, and the guy, of course, upgraded his phone, sold his old one, has no idea, and doesn't know his login. Now, I don't know how that's going to work out, but we've got to watch out for people because, again, yes, we don't like to do tech support for other people. We don't like to do tech support for free, but if we want Bitcoin to succeed, we're going to have to do it one more time. We're going to have to bring these people along with us like we did with the internet or MP3 or whatever your experiences in the past are. So moving on, exit question. How long will it be before Reddit, Twitter, and YouTube integrate their own social tipping platforms? 2 weeks, 3 months, 1 year, or never? Blake Anderson.
Well, I think there was something called Redcoin, which was already kind of trying to be a niche coin for this. I didn't like the monetary policy or very much about Redcoin. And then Reddit was talking about doing their own Reddit coin. Kind of cool. It's just, I think it's a question that should make various companies really want to reach out and try to work with these mediums as opposed to letting them jump in on their own, because it's got to be right on the horizon for them. If it's not, I mean, they're ignoring one of their biggest possible sources of revenue. So I mean, I think almost no time at all.
I've seen a lot of reports that if you don't have someone in your company working on Bitcoin, you might not have a company in a few years. Brian Sovereign.
I guess it's a question first of, would it even be Bitcoin that they would use for this tipping system? I think these tipping systems are going to become very popular. I think Google Wallet's going to be a part of that. Apple Wallet's going to be a part of that. And they will be the faster implementations of those things. And because of that, I'd almost say that that'll be ready in a few months' time. In pretty short order, because I mean everybody's just getting behind Apple. Google Wallet's taking off because Apple Wallet's doing so well. But if the question is not, is it going to be Bitcoin? Will it be some kind of tipping system? It will be there, and it'll probably be Apple Wallet in the very, very near future.
Megan Lords.
Yeah, I think these companies see the benefit of this. I think consumers are ready for this technology to come out. People are already using Google Wallet and things like that, and the time it's ripe for it. And I think we're going to start seeing their own people making their own currency, or organizations having their own currencies by the end of next year.
Megan's right, less than a year, and YouTube already has their own tipping system, just no one uses it. Did you know the World Crypto Network has a brand new webpage? Yes, that's right. You can watch the World Crypto Network anytime, day or night, just by typing www.worldcryptonetwork, all one word, into your web browser or internet-enabled device. Isn't that something? World Crypto Network, YouTube shows about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies available day or night at no cost at all. Can you imagine that kind of convenience? I can't, but I can experience it today at worldcryptonetwork.com. All right, enough shameless promotion. Moving on. The World Crypto Network, mentioned in the Financial Times of London. That's right, the Financial Times, the very same magazine that John McGlaughlin writes for occasionally and has on his show as guests. The Financial Times mentioned the World Crypto Network this week with Izabella Kaminska, writing that on December 6, 2014, in her column entitled The Diary, she writes that perhaps she has spent more than 15 years familiarizing herself with the wrong kind of industry jargon. Perhaps financial jargon is not important for the future, and the new focus will be on tech jargon. Luckily for Izabella, Chris Ellis, an open-source journalist for the World Crypto Network, a YouTube channel that covers cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, has taken pity and agreed to help Izabella with at least some of the basics of coding and cryptography. Kudos for Izabella for the ability to pivot, and thank you to the Financial Times for the mention. And now, your questions, our answers. If you've submitted any question, if you'd like to submit a question now. This is an early show, so there may be less questions. We have one question from Tony P. He says, take a look at Europe. Yes, there are a lot more protests. The amount and size are increasing. The MSN covers nothing. So it sounds like Tony P is disagreeing with us and saying there are a lot more protests. What do you guys think? Are there a lot more protests or just more coverage of it?
I think that there's more of them, and there's actually less coverage of them. We cover them, or they're covered. But like back in the day, which I wouldn't know because I wasn't alive, like there'd be a big Kent State protest or whatever, and everybody would broadcast it all over the world. But now it seems like people are like people are uppity again. Let's move on to the football.
Brian Sovereign, more protests, less protests?
If there is more or less, to me it's kind of regardless, because when you take a case like Eric Garner where the police can just choke a person to death, what does a protest mean? Even if it gets national coverage, because is anybody going to, if say the protest is against some degree of criminality that a government does, is the government going to get held accountable? Clearly not.
Protests are protests, even if they're ineffective, I guess. Megan Lords.
I really can't say, to be honest. I mean, I want to believe that there's more protests, but there's still always a problem with protests, how unified the theory is behind them. So, yeah, I mean, are we heading towards solutions is more what I'm concerned about. I guess I don't see more protests as evidence of solution-based thinking. So I see it as evidence of outrage. I think outrage is growing. I will say, it seems that at least the people I've been talking to and just kind of, maybe I'm in my own bubble, but there is a lot of anger, there's a lot of outrage, and people are getting sick of things. A lot of people are suffering, and, there may be more protests, but I don't know that that leads to more solutions.
Very good. And we're running out of questions, so we're going to move on to predictions or story of the week. Blake Anderson, are you ready with a prediction or a story of the week?
I just think that things are going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse as the economy gets worse. We have, this is wildly offensive, but Rodney King was beaten. He was not beaten to death, and there was big protests when, nothing was done about that. Eric Garner was not just simply beaten, he was killed, and there was, things are getting worse, and when things get worse and they print more money and the people at the bottom of the ladder of society, fall off, and the minimum wage is risen, and so the rungs get moved up, and so they can't, have social mobility. Those are all big problems. So I hope that there'll be some systemic vulnerabilities and security breaches at these big financial institutions, and hopefully they'll bring the top down to the bottom, and then we can have, bottom-up progress pretty soon, because things are getting crazy out there, man. And from an economist standpoint, going over these numbers and figures as they come in all the time, it's just we're all on a bus headed for a wall at 90 miles an hour, arguing where we're going to sit, and this is not going to be good. So, wish it could have been more positive and happy than that, but that's where we're going.
Nothing but a ray of sunshine from Blake Anderson. Meanwhile, I'll hold out hope that maybe Robin Hood or Spider-Man will save us. Brian Sovereign.
Well, yeah, I got to agree with Blake that I don't think things are going to get better. But I actually have a story of the week, which is Microsoft accepting Bitcoin, at least in a pretty limited fashion. And as far as they're letting you buy Xbox digital, just digital stuff. All you can get is digital goods with it, which is pretty interesting. There was about maybe a $20 jump in the price of Bitcoin when it occurred. It's pretty fascinating that they were the first of the big tech giants to really take it on. But the problem that lends is that when you talk about something like predictions, this is a company, Microsoft. I can't predict the thing they're doing anymore. I've been watching them for my whole life pretty much, and they. I don't understand it. They just released apps now. They have an MSN suite of apps that they also released, not just for iOS and Android, but they also released it for Fire OS with Amazon. This is a company that is just breaking every single rule out there, and that kind of creates almost a scary aspect because it's that unknown. Which is funny because Microsoft would be that one company that you would say is the known quantity. Okay, they're going to be stodgy. They're going to be, just do what they've always done. But now they're breaking every rule. Forget Apple, forget Google, forget them all. Microsoft may be a real leader into the future. But that's the thing is, this is so unpredictable. I can't say that what they're going to do. This might be a complete failure on their part, but maybe not.
They'll have to adapt or die, and it sounds like they're actually adapting, so I'm shocked on that.
Yeah, me too.
And their recent purchase of Minecraft was also really interesting. I'd like to see Minecraft incorporated into Windows. Instead of going to Control Panel, you should have to build some blocks. If you want to use the sound controls, you should have to combine 3 blocks together. I think that the Microsoft engineers that I used to, use their software, they'll get right into that. They'll be into that for sure.
Well, they also have intelligent-esque investors and stuff, and board members and stakeholders that want them to stay ahead of the curve, and so they pressure them to go and explore different things and to try to make money, as opposed to like someone like PepsiCo or whatever. It's like, don't go and research Pepsi Clear anymore. Just make what you're supposed to make and give us dividends. So I think it's kind of cool too when you look at the economics of the bigger companies that have been around actually staying in competition, like how stuff used to supposed to be. I think that's kind of a cool view too on Microsoft.
Well, if I could comment on that quick, that's interesting because this is, we talked about Google and Apple having wallet implementations. Microsoft doesn't really have that, and so they went with the lean move, where the lean startup type move, where you get the infrastructure that's already there, which is Bitcoin. But that's what's scary is that you have this huge company, kind of like Uber, where it's already become a massive company, but it's still acting like it's a lean startup. That it creates a really interesting situation where Microsoft has this immense amount of wealth and power. And yet they're acting no holds barred, and that's really going to make for an interesting space. And who knows what it even says for Bitcoin?
That is very odd to see Microsoft buddied up against Bitcoin. They could make their own wallet. They could make their own product. In the past, they made the Zune to compete with Apple. They made the Microsoft phone to compete with the iPhone. They did all these imitations. Now, they're like you say, they're acting like a lean startup. It's only Nixon could go to China. Megan Lords.
So I don't really have, I guess, a prediction or story of the week. I guess maybe I just have like a message, and that's like, take care of yourself, because it's a really tough time of year, and a lot of people I know have been going through some really rough patches, and especially with the price being so low. We started this year on a really big high, and now it's kind of worn off, and we've kind of had to face reality very soberly, and it's something that has really been rough on a lot of people. So take care of yourself, like unplug every now and then. Don't be constantly watching the news so much. Stuff like the torture report, it's horrible, it's atrocious, it's the worst thing you can imagine, but try to unplug, spend time with people you love, and just take care of your health, because this is a really high point. This time of year is notorious for suicides and things like that. A lot of people are very, very bad off, so just try to unplug for a while, take care of yourself, and focus on what matters and what's immediately important to you, and try not to stress so much about these things that you can't control. We're not going to be able to lynch Dick Cheney as much as some of us want to, so take care of your health first and foremost.
Great points, Megan. Very worthwhile. And finally, a prediction. If you will it, it is no dream, dude. Open source knows the way. If you've got a problem, solve it. Solve your problem today with open source. Open source provides the transparency that, as we all know, is the best disinfectant. Gets rid of tough stains fast. Open source. And it's free. Oh, we're out of time. Until next time. Bye-bye.